2005, 57-year-old Steven Slevin was a physically healthy man, but mentally he was struggling. He was depressed and felt like his life didn't have any purpose anymore, and so in August of that year, he decided to just go on a road trip. He eventually began drinking alcohol, and before long, he was swerving along the New Mexico highway, and a police officer saw his erratic driving and pulled him over. Once Steven failed his sobriety test, the police officer arrested him. Steven was brought to a local detention center, where during his booking process, it was discovered that he had a history of mental illness. And so the officers, following that county's policy, segregated him from the rest of the general population. They moved him into a padded cell on the first floor. After a few days in this padded cell, Steven was moved to another, better cell that had a window, it had a shower, it had a toilet, and he was there for 2 weeks under strict medical observation. But at the end of those 2 weeks, Steven was moved into solitary confinement to await trial for his DWI. Solitary confinement is a type of imprisonment where the inmate is shifted into a single-person cell without any significant interaction with other people or other inmates. The psychological effects of solitary confinement are well documented and terrifying. Roughly 3 months into his solitary stint, Steven had not had any updates on when his case was going to go to trial, and Steven was starting to lose his grip on reality. Steven began spending the bulk of his day in the corner of his cell with his knees tucked up to his chest, rocking back and forth. And without leaving his cell, Steven was unable to bathe, and so his skin began developing fungus and began falling off, and his teeth began to rot. 1 year and 8 months of being in solitary confinement, Steven was transferred out of his cell to a behavioral institute in Las Vegas, Nevada. After bathing and shaving and cutting his hair and receiving proper medical treatment, he was back to his normal self within a couple of days. And while he was there, he had a chance to speak to a lawyer, and the lawyer would say the entire meeting, Steven was just saying, "Where have I been?" And the lawyer said, "You've been in solitary confinement awaiting trial. You've been there for almost 2 years." And to that, Steven was shocked and literally didn't believe him. He actually couldn't remember that time in his life. But when the lawyer told him about it, it began to come back into his mind, and he begged the lawyer to not let them send him back to solitary confinement. Steven stayed at this institute for 2 weeks, and at the end of those 2 weeks, Steven was abruptly taken out of his room, put in a van, driven back to New Mexico, and put back into his solitary confinement cell. And immediately, Steven began to deteriorate. Steven developed an abscess in one of his teeth, and he tried to get medical attention, but he didn't get it. Almost 2 months later, Steven's case was finally put before a judge, and the judge dismissed all of the charges. 3 days later, Steven was released from jail. He had been in solitary confinement for 2 years without so much as a hearing to tell him what was going on. He would go on to sue the county and win $15.5 million in damages. However, he was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer and given less than a year to live. It's unclear if he is alive today.